of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Hello, and welcome to the Quiet Happiness Knits podcast. My name is Emily, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful and very snowy state of Maine today. And welcome to my podcast. Today I'm going to talk about a lot of knitting. It's been a while since I recorded, so I've got a lot to talk about. I also have some hand spun yarn. It's so exciting. So I'm going to talk about hand spun yarn, knitting, and then I have a book recommendation at the end. So welcome to new and returning viewers. Welcome to my yarn wall. My sister helped me do some room renovations this spring, and we were talking about like what we we're going to do and stuff. When I say my sister helped me, what I mean is that my older sister came to me and said, "Would you like to renovate your room this spring?" And I said, "Yes, just tell me what to buy." So she suggested, she was like, "Well, what if we did a yarn wall?" So we got a big piece of pegboard, and she was like, "Do you want the whole thing, or should I cut it?" I was like, I absolutely want the whole piece. So we got pegboard, painted it, and then I bought some hooks. So fun story. My sister found the hooks that would fit online. Like I said, she just tells me what to buy. So I was like, 50 pack of hooks. I'll buy them, try them out. Yeah, 50 hooks covered maybe a third of the yarn wall and not even a third of the yarn I own. So I later went back and bought 100 more hooks. I still have probably 40 or so that I haven't used. So I was realizing this is the first, I think you've seen some, I feel like I've put video clips of this yarn wall in some of my videos, but I think this is the first time that I've recorded inside, probably at all this year. So yeah, this is the yarn wall, and I am wearing, this is probably one of the first sweaters I ever knit for myself. I had knit a few baby and kids sweaters for siblings, but I had never knit one for myself, and that was also because I started knitting when I was 12 and didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't have enough money to buy a whole sweater's quantity of yarn. So someone gave me some wool yarn, and I knit this. It was a pattern out of a knitting Interweave Knits, out of an Interweave Knits catalog that I had. And I love it. It's so cozy. And it's the kind of thing that I can look at it and see things like my collar's a little wonky and my seaming is weird, but I love it. So yeah, so that's what I'm wearing. And fun story. I actually attempted to record this podcast last week. Today is Saturday. I recorded a podcast last Saturday on my camera. And then I realized, because I'm so used to filming outside with my camera, then I realized the lens that I was using adds a layer of white noise to videos. Which is not super noticeable when it's outside, because there's white noise outside just because I'm sitting in the woods. But it was very noticeable inside, and I started trying to edit, and I couldn't take it. I put headphones in to edit, and I was absolutely not. This is not happening. So we're trying again. This time I'm filming on my phone. I recently got a new phone, so I'm actually that has a much better camera than my old phone. So this may be the setup going forward. We'll see. So when I say this is my first time recording inside, it's my first time uploading a podcast recorded inside, but it is not the first time I've attempted to record this. So anyway, 4.5 minutes in, let's start talking about the crafting. One more just disclaimer right up front. So I'm sitting in this chair that my friend picked up on the side of the road for me when I was redoing my room and said I wanted a nice chair. So it's a fun, like, wingback chair, but it definitely has some spring issues, like in the seat. So if you hear any creaks or anything, it's just because the chair makes noise. I'm always low-key afraid it's going to collapse on me. But I've been sitting up for like 5 months and it's been fine. So fingers crossed. I feel like I'm talking really fast today. I'll try to slow it down. So I have a fun little basket of hand-spun yarn. So I have done some drop spindling in the past. I took a class, so I've done it on and off the past couple of years. Nothing that I've done consistently or made a lot of yarn, just something I normally pull it out in the summertime and just do a little bit of spindle spinning, sitting on the porch or whatever. But then my knitting friend Sarah asked, she knew that I'd been wanting to learn how to spin, how to wheel spin. And she was selling her electric spinning wheel, and because she was upgrading to a different wheel, and asked if I would like to buy it. And I said I absolutely would. So she even sent it along in the cute, look at the cute little sleepy case that she had bought for this. And this is the Electric Eel Nano 1.1, I believe is the full name. So I knew that electric spinning wheels existed, but I didn't really know anything about them. But it's so cute. Like, it's not very big, which is great because part of my hesitation with wheel spinning is that I really don't have anywhere to put a wheel, even a smaller one. So that was kind of holding me back. But this one, like, everything you need just fits in the little case. And then I have like a cube shelf. And so I just have one of the baskets on my shelf just holding my fiber and my wheel. So basically how it works, you plug it in. You can also, I have also done this. I did it a little bit outside. We had some warm days in November. So I went out and sat on the porch. I ran it off of like a battery pack that I have for like traveling to plug my phone into. So I actually was able to plug it into that and do this outside. So basically you plug it in and then there's switches for doing an S twist or a Z twist. And then there's a knob to adjust how fast you want it to spin. So, that has been so fun. I want to get back to it. I have a couple pairs of Christmas socks that I'm working on right now that I would like to finish up, so I haven't been doing any spinning the past couple of weeks, but it is so relaxing and enjoyable. And it produces yarn way faster than spindle spinning, which is another plus. So in my basket, I have a few, I'm not going to go into great detail on them because I'm just experimenting. But first I did some plying. I plied some of, I think this was, let me find one, that I had done on my drop spindle and that I plied it on the wheel. I think this is, I have a bunch of like the same fiber that I have done in various things. So this, I had spun, this is probably my most recent drop spindle spinning that I then plied on the wheel. And like, this was my first drop spindle. So you can see how the first yarn I spun on the drop spindle was really tight. And this is just a single ply. And then I definitely got a little bit better at controlling how tight I was spinning. This is very rope-like. So I had some of that fiber. It's an undyed BFL that I bought from Port Fiber, which is a fiber and yarn shop in Portland, Maine. So then I had some left, so I just did some spinning. This is the first fiber that I spun on my new electric wheel. So I spun and plied it. And I definitely think I think I am underspinning a bit. And this is like, I've washed this. Like it's very soft, but I think I'm definitely underspinning. So as I've been experimenting some more, and I've been trying to do it differently. Just to, because with the electric wheel, you turn the knob to tell it how fast to spin the yarn. And when I was just getting used to it, I was doing it slower. But I think as I've been experimenting, I've been trying to turn it up a little bit to get a little bit more twist in the yarn. So I spun some BFL. Sarah included a few fiber samples when she sent me the wheel. This is some Clune Forest, which is, it feels very different from the BFL. It's extremely springy, and from what little I know about spinning, I was looking at the Book of Wool by Clara Parks, and she said that Clune Forest is often spun using a woolen prep, which makes sense. The woolen yarns I've used feel very similar to just how this fiber feels. So I spun up that little sample. Kyla, who is Arctos Knits, when she saw that I was spinning, offered to send me some fiber, and she sent me a whole bunch of different kinds of fiber, which was so sweet. So this was just some 100% wool roving, this beautiful blue color that I have spun and washed. And then I still need to wash this, but I tried using some of the same blue fiber and spun it tighter. So I don't know how much you can see. So this is the one where I was spinning it a little bit tighter. And it's been plied. And I think you can see the difference. This one's a little bit more underspun. This one's just a little bit tighter. And then I've just been playing around with some more fiber from Port Fiber. This is, I think it's some sort of, I don't have the tag with me, like a BFL with a little bit of silk. And I just love this color. And again, trying to spin it a little bit tighter. And so I've just been experimenting, doing 2-ply. I've done like I think it's called an Andean bracelet, to do a 2-ply if you only have yarn like on one bobbin. So I've been doing that like with the little ends from my yarn. You get like these little baby skeins. So yeah, that is my hand spinning adventures so far. And it's so fun to just like put on, especially during whatever we're calling the first part of November that was like election season week, whatever. In the evenings when I was done work, I would put on like a funny TV show or movie and just spin. And it was like that was how I would unwind every night. So it was perfect. So that is all of my hand spinning. So now we can move in to some finished objects. I just piled a bunch of stuff on my basket, so this may be a mix of finished objects into works in progress to finished objects. Who knows? Who knows? So the first big finished object I have is a sweater. This is the Boheme Pullover by Annie Lupton of Boho Chic Fiber Co. Last time I recorded, I think I had seamed in the shoulders, I think, is what I had done. It wasn't completely finished yet. And then I finished it soon after that, and I've been wearing it all the time. So this is knit using some yarn from On the Round in a fingering weight base. I bought it on Ravelry D-Stash. And this is a saddle shoulder construction, and then it's got this lace panel with some broken rib on the sides, and then the back is the broken rib. And then the sleeves have a section of the same lace panel. This sweater is the coziest. It is slightly oversized, which is fabulous. It's my favorite way to have a sweater. And it fits really, really well. I could have done it a little bit shorter. My gauge was a lot smaller than the pattern, So I'd done some finagling and adding in some extra repeats. I could have made it a little bit shorter, but I love it. It's perfect for wearing with leggings too. And the camera's kind of picking up some of the variations in the hand-dyed yarn. They're not as obvious in real life as they look on the camera. But I've been wearing this all the time. This is one of my absolute favorite colors. So I've just been wearing the heck out of this sweater. So fun. So yeah, I don't have a lot to say about that sweater. If you want to know more of the details and how I was changing things, for my gauge, you can check out, I think, either of my last 2 videos. Because I have another sweater to talk about. I believe last time I had started this. But this is the Breathing Space pattern by Vera Velomaki. And I knit this. The solid green is Swan's Island Natural Colors fingering, or something like that, in the Tarragon colorway. And then the stripes are knit out of a skein of yarn from Barnyard Knits that my friend Sarah sent me. So this sweater is for my grandmother. I had knit myself a Breathing Space top earlier this year. I think that was this year. And then my mom really liked it, so then I cast on one for her. And then my grandmother really loved it. And she kind of like half jokingly said that like, oh, I keep meaning to ask you how much it would cost me to have you make one for me. But this is, number one, it's my grandmother. Number 2, I have worn multiple sweaters in my lifetime that my grandmother has made me. She's made, I think pretty much everybody in my family has worn at least one sweater that my grandmother has made. And I'm one of 9 kids, so that's a lot of sweaters. So I was like, she has knit things for other people like forever and still continues to do so. So I'm going to gift her a sweater. So I pulled out from my stash and had my mom help me pick out colors she thought my grandmother would like. And then what I did, I saw her in November and we kind of did a little gift exchange where like she gave my family our Christmas gifts, we gave her ours. And I had put in a lifeline to see if it was long enough because this is kind of a tunic style and it has an asymmetrical hem, so I just didn't know how long she would want it. So I put in a lifeline and I asked her to try it on. So then we could figure out how long it should be. So my grandmother put it on and wanted it to be a few inches longer. So I had finished the sweater and done the ribbing, but I put the lifeline in like above the ribbing. So then I just pulled the ribbing out and knit a few more inches of the stockinette stitch at the bottom and added the ribbing. So I finished that and now I just need to package it up and mail it to her. Probably, I mean, at this point, it probably won't arrive before Christmas, but hopefully relatively soon. So yeah, I finished 2 sweaters. Which of course means that we're going to talk later about another sweater that I cast on. Oh. So I finished 2 sweaters and a tunic. So it's going to be hard to show you this one. So this has been a long-standing whip. But this is, I adapted the Fern and Feather sweater pattern by Jennifer Steingass, who's Knit Love Wool on Instagram. And, okay. So this is a normal colorwork yoke sweater, is what the pattern is written for. But this yarn, I don't have the label with me. It's from, I believe it's called the Columbia Stock Ranch or something like that in Montana. So I had purchased this yarn in a Ravelry D-stash a while ago. I'd purchased the brown yarn. And I wanted to make a tunic. And For some reason, I thought it was a bulky weight yarn, and then I looked on Ravelry after I bought it, and I was like, this is absolutely not a bulky weight. It's an Aran weight. But I had a tunic pattern that was written for bulky weight yarn that I cast on with this yarn, and I just didn't really like how it was turning out. So I got a few inches on that tunic done, ripped it out. Then I bought a couple skeins of the blue, and I knit a cardigan that was brown, but then had the blue for button bands, the hem, and the cuffs and the sleeves. But I didn't really like how it looked. I didn't wear it very often. I never bothered to put buttons on it. And I still had more yarn left over than I thought I would. So I had that cardigan in my closet for like a year maybe. Only wore it a couple of times. So then I decided to frog it. And I thought I would like the look of the blue with the brown better in a color work rather than like a color block style. So I looked around, and there's not a ton of ones that I like that were an Aran weight. Like if you want fingering or DK weight colorwork yoke sweaters, they're everywhere. But I was having trouble finding a ton of options with Aran weight. And I think this one is written for like I think maybe for Let Lopey or something that is kind of like a worsted Aran weight, kind of in between. So I cast this on, just started doing it like normal. And, but as I was knitting, I was like, but what if I turned this into the tunic that I wanted when I bought the yarn? But it's knit at a very dense gauge because it's Aran weight yarn on size 7 needles. So it's a pretty dense gauge, and so I was afraid it might be too warm if I did long sleeves. And I wanted to have as much yarn as I could to make it more of a longer tunic instead of like an awkwardly too long sweater that wasn't a tunic. So once I knew I wanted to make this into a tunic, I went back and I picked up the sleeve stitches and just did like an inch of ribbing to turn it into short sleeves. So that way it wouldn't be too warm. And then if I want to layer, I can wear like a long sleeve shirt underneath it if I want longer sleeves. So then to make the tunic part of the body, basically I did not do any of the waist decreases, but then when it was long enough to start the hip increases, I just kept increasing pretty much all the way to the bottom. So it was like increasing 4 stitches every, I don't remember, 7 or 8 rows maybe. And I periodically would try it on. I had to put it on 2 circular needles, and then I would try it on just to make sure that it was, that I was increasing enough. So, and I was. So I have not tried it on now that I've just recently did the bind off on the bottom. So I haven't tried it on yet, but it is nice and long, and I'm probably going to wear this a lot around the house, like with leggings or jeans or something, or tights. And I am so happy to finally have the tunic that I wanted when I originally bought this yarn. And I had worked on this a lot in the spring, but then it had kind of gotten put aside just because it's a very woolly wool and it's Aran weight, and I didn't really want it on my lap during the summer. But I finally have finished it, and I'm so excited. I'm not excited to block it because it's massive and I feel like it's going to take a long time to dry, but I am excited to wear it, especially since I'm working from home right now, so I love being able to wear all of my cozy, oversized hand-knit sweaters that are not really, business casual, but I love. So I'm excited to wear this while I work from home. So that's my my pile of sweaters. My other finished object is not a sweater. It is, in fact, a cowl. And The pattern for this is a test knit. The pattern's not out yet, but I wanted to make sure that I talked about it because this is probably the last podcast that you will see from me for the next few months. I work in public accounting. I'm just a little baby accountant. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I don't know what I'm doing well enough to keep my job. So tax season here in the US kicks up like early to mid-January and then hits you like a ton of bricks. And you keep going until mid-April. So I am not going to have time. I'll still be doing a little bit of knitting in those months, but I will not be recording any videos until late April at the earliest, more likely May. So this pattern is not due to come out for another, I don't know when exactly it's coming out. I'll definitely post on Instagram when it comes out, but I want to talk about it now. So then maybe if you love it, you can get excited about it and get your yarn ready, because that's what I did, and then I ended up test knitting. So this is the Curious Labyrinth Cowl by Matt of Maker's Knitting. And it is this gloriously soft and squishy brioche cowl. And you use, the pattern is written to be used, you hold DK weight yarn for color A, and then 1 strand of DK weight yarn, and then 1 strand of fingering weight plus 1 strand of mohair for color B. So I had seen that Matt was working on this pattern and I really loved it. And I don't have a lot of DK weight yarn. You look at all this, most of this is fingering weight. But I had 2 skeins of this purple fingering weight yarn from Wild Star Fibers that I'd bought a little while ago. And then when Legacy Fiber Arts was having a sale, or like a free shipping or something, Rhinebeck weekend, I had bought a skein of the Mare, which is this like white with some pink, orange, and purple speckles and different colors in there. And because I wanted to have something to go along with the purple yarn that I had, maybe do a shawl or like a short sleeved colorwork sweater or something. And then so that I knew when Matt, when I saw his cowl, I knew that the yarn would be really good to put together with this. Now, so like I said, the pattern is written to use a skein of DK weight yarn, but instead I held my fingering weight yarn double and used almost all of the 2 skeins. So I used two strands of fingering weight, and so I knew that this is the yarn I was going to use. So then I bought mohair, and I told Matt, like, okay, I'm so pumped for this cowl to come out. I bought mohair so that I can cast on as soon as the pattern comes out. And then he asked if I wanted to test knit. And I said yes, because I already have my yarn and I want to knit this. So I used 2 skeins of fingering weight for the purple, and then 1 skein of fingering and 1 skein of mohair for the second color. And like I said, I used almost all. I maybe have 5 or 6 grams left of the purple yarn, and then some left of the mohair. The mohair is from On the Round. I think that it's her petal colorway. It's this very, very light, like blush pink color, which I wanted because I just liked, I liked how the speckles looked in the variegated yarn, and I wanted the mohair to just be a really nice halo, but not compete with the colors. And it's the perfect length, because you can wear it doubled up. Which is how I wear cowls. But because you've got either DK weight yarn or 2 strands of fingering weight, and then you've got the mohair, it just makes it really nice and cozy and squishy. So then it actually will keep you warm. Because sometimes if it's just a fingering weight cowl, it is more drapey, which is also fabulous. But sometimes I need something that's going to be nice and bulky and squishy, which brioche is perfect for. I would say if you've never done brioche before, you may want to start out with a smaller project just to learn how to do brioche. But then because this is just the same motif all the way around, after you've done a few repeats, like after you've done, 3 or 4 of the sections, you don't really need to look at the chart anymore to go all the way around. So, because I haven't done a ton of brioche, I've only done a few projects. So this is a really fun way to get to experiment with it. And I definitely have some spots where I missed increases or decreases, but there's so much going on that you really cannot tell. I mean, and if you wanted to, I'm sure you could probably cast on half as many stitches and have your cowl be this size, which then would get you more like this. Ooh, which I kind of like. See, now I want one. Although this is extra squishy because it's folded over. Oh, and my other, one of my favorite details about this pattern is that Matt has written an I-cord etching for both the top and the bottom, which I think just really finishes it off really nicely. And you do stripes in the I-cord, so you're using the 2 colors that you used in the rest of the cowl, which I feel like it just helps it to kind of be a little bit more structured and hold together, and it's just a really professional looking finish on the cowl. So yeah, I'm really excited for the pattern to come out so more people can make this, and I'm excited to wear it this winter. So I think that's all I have for finished objects. There may be a couple pairs of socks that I finished since last time, but they're socks. So moving on, because I have other socks to talk about. But first, I've talked a lot about sweaters today, but I still have one more to talk about. So when I was almost done with my fern and feather tunic, I started planning my next sweater project. I like to start planning my next sweater project while my current sweater is still in the needles, because it just helps me to slow the process down and actually do a gauge swatch and block it and plan it out a little bit more. So I've had the Porter Light cardigan by Beatrice Parandolin in my queue for a while. And I had the yarn for a while, so I pretty much knew that was going to be my next project. So it is a all over cabled textured cardigan knit in worsted weight yarn. So I did a gauge swatch, and you gauge the moss stitch. So she gives the gauge for the moss stitch and this honeycomb stitch, which is a lot of 1x1 cables. And this is the same amount of stitches, but obviously the cable pattern pulls in a lot more. So she gives the gauge for both. So I did this. So I swatched, I measured it before and after blocking. I usually forget to measure before blocking, but I remembered this time. So in the yarn is Quince & Co. Lark, which is their worsted weight base. And this is the twig colorway. So I had bought this yarn on a D-stash a few years ago. And I bought it because it was a sweater's quantity. So then I cast on for the sleeve. I like to knit sleeves first in a cardigan. Not in a cardigan, in a sweater in general, when I can. Just because, I don't know, then it is kind of a test to see, okay, is the gauge working? Is this the right gauge? Do I like how the fabric looks in the actual garment before you cast on for any of the body? And now that's different if you're doing a top-down sweater, but in a top-down, you're starting out with a yoke, which is smaller than the bottom. If you're doing a bottom-up sweater, whether it's in pieces or knit is in one piece, that's just a lot more stitches than top-down. So this sweater's knit bottom-up, so I'm starting with the sleeves. When I knit top-down, I don't start with the sleeves. is basically what I was trying to say. And I'd forgotten how fast worsted weight sleeves knit up. Because the last couple sweaters I've knit were fingering weight. And fingering weight tends to be my go-to for sweaters just because they're light enough that I can normally still wear them like inside the office all day and not get too warm. But I was realizing that I only really have one cardigan, one hand knit cardigan, and I wear it all the time. So it's just a gray, really good staple cardigan, but I was thinking I wanted one in a brown. Therefore, I'm casting this one on. So I think I'm almost done with the sleeves pre-shoulder shaping. So the sweater is knit, so it's a cardigan, but the body is knit in one piece, and then one piece flat, and then the sleeves are knit in the round. So yeah, so this is the beginning of the first sleeve. So basically it's got this simple cable pattern down the center of the sleeve, and then it has the moss stitch on the rest of it. So which I love. It's such a fun texture to knit and adds a lot of interest without necessarily needing to add a lot of cables. Like, this is a really mindless stitch pattern to work on. So I've got all of my yarn in my favorite Madder Root bag. I absolutely love her bags. They are my favorite. I think at this point I have 4. I think I have 3 sweater ones, like 3 of her bigger bags and 1 of her sock bags. But I love that I can fit all the yarn I need for my sweater in this bag. And sometimes I can throw my wallet in it and it doubles as a purse. So that is my current sweater work in progress. I had originally been thinking like, oh, worsted weight would be a good sweater to kind of have on the needles during tax season. Last year I had a bulky weight sweater on the needles just because I don't have a lot of knitting time during tax season. So it's nice to work with a heavier weight yarn, something that's not fingering weight, just to see a little bit more progress. So, I mean, the sleeve is knitting up really fast, but I'm sure I'll still be working on it in a month. So that is all I have for sweaters. I promise that's all. So my next project is a hat. So putting all my yarn on the wall kind of made me reevaluate how much yarn I have. Has it stopped me from buying more yarn? No, it has not. But it's fun to kind of put yarns together. Like, I moved, like, these are not the same yarn, but like I had this yarn hanging here and was kind of thinking of what to make with it and thought this yarn would go with it nicely. So then I hung it on the same hook. So it's fun to see the yarn and kind of play around with it, see different yarn combinations I may not have thought of otherwise. But it's also made me realize I have a lot of just single skeins of yarn. So I kind of have a few patterns that I want to make that are single skein patterns. And I knit one of them a couple weeks ago. So this is the Early Rising hat, and her Ravelry designer name, I think, or her Instagram name is by Annie Claire. And the sample in the pattern was knit with yarn from Wing and a Prayer Farm. And I had a skein from Wing and a Prayer Farm. It was a different base, but this is a 100% wool Cormo DK weight. So, and then Tammy lists all of the sheep whose wool is in the sweater, not in the sweater, whose wool is in the yarn. So she has them all listed on the tag, which is so sweet. And I had bought this yarn at a trunk show and event, natural dyeing, kind of just this whole Wing and a Prayer Farm event that Taproot magazine in Portland was hosting. And it was back in like the first week of March, and it was one of the last like events that I attended before everything closed down. So this is just kind of extra special because I get to meet Tammy that night, and she had even baked some pies for us to have as a snack after. She talked about her farm, did a natural dyeing demo, and then I had all of her yarn out on the table for us to peruse. And even before I went to that event, this hat had been in my queue for a while. I just love the cables, and I love like the intertwining cables, and it's got garter stitch in between, which just makes it so squishy. So I finally knit this hat, and it's I knit, I think the middle size, I think there's 3 sizes. I'd originally cast on for the largest size, but after doing like a couple inches of the ribbing, it just looked incredibly massive. So I swapped out to do the middle size, and it fits really well. And sometimes when hats are a little bit tighter, they tend to just like slide off my head, especially if my hair is down. But I think this one has enough ribbing that it stays on really well. So and it's so warm. I love it so much. And I have a few more skeins of yarn from Wing and a Prayer Farm up here. This red one. There's a blue one behind there. And these 2. And then I have 2 of these purple skeins. And I have some ideas for what I want to do with them, but I also just love looking at them. And then going and watching Tammy's Instagram stories to see more sheep. So anyway, so I knit the hat. But then I still had about 50 grams of the yarn left. Now the yarn label says that it's 100 grams, but then I weighed the hat, and the hat weighs about 60 grams or so, and then I still had 50 grams left over, so it was obviously a little bit extra. So then I wanted like 50 grams of a DK weight yarn is still enough yarn to make something. It didn't need to go directly into my like scraps and leftovers basket. And I was thinking I don't have a lot of like, or I don't have any like matching hat and mitten sets, or like hat and cowl, or hat and scarf or anything, but 50 grams was not really enough. It was not going to be enough to make a cowl, so I thought I'd make some mittens. But when I was looking at patterns, 50 grams is kind of like on the most DK weight mitten patterns I found were saying that you needed more than 50 grams of yarn. So I figured I could start knitting a pair of mittens, and if I didn't have enough yarn to do a full pair of mittens, I could do fingerless gloves. So I split my remaining yarn into 2 25-gram balls of yarn. So then I could knit the first mitten, see how much yarn it took, and before starting the second one, that way I knew I'd have enough yarn to do the same thing on both mittens, whatever I ended up doing. So it ended up pretty much being enough for a full mitten. So I wanted to use the same cable as is on the hat. But I was looking around for mitten patterns. I didn't really want to buy a mitten pattern if I was just going to be replacing whatever was on it with a different stitch pattern. Anyway. So I ended up using a DK weight pattern that I had already in a book that it was written just like vanilla mittens. So both hands were written the same because it was just all stockinette stitch on the hand. So I thought that was basically my template, and then I adapted the cable pattern from the hat. So on the hat, you have intertwining cables. So like you start with this cable, and then it splits off and joins these 2, and then it comes back together. But that's too wide to put. That was too wide to put on a mitten. So I adapted the cable pattern a little bit. And then instead of doing stockinette stitch for the body, to kind of match the hat, I did garter stitch on the rest of the hand and the thumb. But to make sure I had enough yarn for the first mitten, I actually did a provisional cast on and just started knitting the hand, figuring if I had enough yarn, I'd go back and knit the cuff in the same color. If I ran out of yarn, I could always find a different color to knit the cuff. So in the end, I did a mix. So I did a provisional cast on, and then I knit the hand and put the cable in there, just made up the decreases on the top, did something. Don't remember what. Because I went to do the second mitten. Couldn't remember what I'd done. So then I had a little bit of the yarn left over, and I had some scraps of some hand spun yarn that I had bought a while ago that I knit into a different hat. It's another really rustic wool, more rustic and a little bit more scratchy feeling than the Wing and a Prayer Farm. But I thought they'd go well together, so then I did some garter stitch stripes for the cuff. And it's the perfect length so that it ends before my watch. And I have and this is how much yarn I have left. So, and originally I'd put in a lifeline at about where I would end it for a pair of fingerless mittens before I finished off the top, because then if I didn't have enough to finish the top of the mitten and do the thumb, I could rip back to my lifeline and just have them be fingerless mittens. So this is the first mitten, and then I'm almost done with the second. I just need to I didn't have my tapestry needle with me, so I just need to close off the top and do the thumb. So for the second mitten, since I knew I would have enough yarn, I did not do the provisional cast on. I just knit the cuff. I just started with the cuff. And then because I'm doing garter stitch in the round, and when you do that, you get that kind of garter jog where you're switching at the beginning of your round, where you're switching from knitting and purling. And like I said earlier, this pattern is written to be the same on both hands because the pattern that I was following just has stockinette stitch on the hand. But I knew that, so if I put this on the other hand, if the only thing I changed was putting the cable here, then I would end up with that garter jog on the front of the hand, which would be fine. But since I was already changing the pattern anyway, I figured I might as well move where the thumb and the cable are. So now I still have that garter jog on the back. I just swapped everything from having my thumb and my cable at the beginning of the round on this mitten to being at the end of the round on the second mitten. So I am very excited. I'm almost done with these. I just need to finish off the thumb. Okay, we're now going to move in to all of the socks. So this always seems to happen to me at this time of year. I'm either knitting, because this happened last year too, if I'm knitting Christmas socks, gift socks, Advent mini skein socks, something, I'm always knitting multiple pairs of socks in December. So the first pair I'm working on is just a vanilla ribbed Christmas sock. So I had been given this yarn, and it didn't come with a label, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the West Yorkshire Spinners Christmas colorways from a few years ago. And I had purchased a solid red West Yorkshire Spinners yarn to go with Christmas socks, to go with the Christmas yarn I bought from them last year. So I had this already. So then I just decided that I would cast on and knit some really easy mindless socks. So I did 20 rounds of 2x2 ribbing, and then I sometimes find that vanilla socks are just really slouchy. So I thought I would do a rib pattern and just continue the 2x2 rib all the way down the leg and then on the top of the sock. So it looks really small, but it's 72 stitches on my size 1 9-inch circulars. So just 2x2 rib, and then I did a Fish Lips Kiss heel in the solid red yarn. And then I'm continuing with the Christmas stripe yarn, and then I'll do the toe in the red yarn. I'm doubting I'll have these done by Christmas, but that's fine. I do have a few skeins of Christmas yarn that I would love to have knit up into Christmas socks. So this is me finally knitting this yarn just into some some vanilla Christmas socks. And of course, I think the shop name for this project bag, something about like 3 Fates thread or something. But it is a Doctor Who bag. Doctor Who is my favorite, and I've only watched a few seasons of classic Doctor Who, but I got into that like back in April or so. But yeah, so it's like cartoon doctors, and then quote on this side, it says, "Never cruel or cowardly, never give up, never give in," which is one of my favorite 12th Doctor quotes. Nobody does a monologue like the 12th Doctor, unless it's one of the other Doctors. I apologize if you're not a Doctor Who fan, but I love this bag, and it fits both of the skeins of fingering weight, and it's got a square bottom, so it can just sit really nicely. So that is just my mindless sock knitting. I always like, even if I have another sock on the needles, if I have a pair of socks on the needles, that means I need to like look at the pattern or really pay attention to what I'm doing. I like to also have mindless socks on the needles at all times. So I'm knitting another pair of kind of Christmassy socks. I bought a couple sock sets from Shop La Mercerie. Had an update where she had some different dyers sock sets. So this was a sock set from Woolberry Fiber Co. in her Merry Little Christmas colorway. So the main yarn is this kind of blue-gray with some red speckles, and then the mini skein is this red yarn. So I am knitting the I Smell Snow socks, again by Matt of Maker's Knitting, who designed the Brioche Cowl I talked about earlier. So it has this cable pattern and then some bobbles along the sides, and he includes a tutorial for how to do the bobbles where you purl backwards instead of needing to turn your work, and it is a game changer, and it makes them so much more fun to knit. So this is the first sock, and then I am knitting the heel flap. I'm almost done the heel flap, and then I'm going to turn the heel really soon. So I'm up to the heel flap on the second sock. So yeah, they're just so fun. And I just thought that using like a Christmas colorway with a pattern called I Smell Snow was just a fabulous way to use my Christmas yarn. So I'm knitting these on double pointed needles. The last several pairs of socks that I've knit were on, I've been using my 9-inch circular a lot, but that was being used on other socks. So I decided to go with my trusty old double pointed needles. Now I will, so I'm knitting these in the 64, I believe it's a 64 stitch size. But what I found is that on my 9-inch circulars, I tend to knit tighter on those than I do on double pointed needles. So I have been doing 72 stitch socks when I'm using those circular needles. So when I went to cast on for the second sock, I blithely cast on 72 stitches. And then I went to work the chart, and I knew I was knitting the medium chart. And I was like, wait a minute, my stitch count is off to, like, because I had the stitches evenly divided on my 4 DPNs, which should mean that the cable pattern uses all the stitches on 2 DPNs, but I had a bunch of stitches left over. And that was when I realized I had cast on 72 stitches. Did I rip the cuff back? Absolutely not. I just decreased a bunch of stitches all in one round. So the cuff is a little bit bigger. I mean, but it's ribbing. Like, this is the bigger cuff. It's ribbing. It's fine. It's fine. I am not about that. The only time, if I was doing a test knit or something, I probably would have ripped it back. But it does not materially alter the pattern. And like the cuff is going to get stretched out when I wear them anyway. So it's fine. It's whatever. I can get stressed out about, work stuff. I don't need to get stressed out about knitting stuff. So I just do whatever. Whatever floats my boat. The last pair of socks I have, I'm going to grab a sock blocker. I'm still in love with these. I just love them. So I'm going to put the first sock on here because I am knitting a pair of scrappy socks with some Advent mini skeins. So the past few years I have done an Advent mini skein swap with knitting friends, and it's just a really fun way to be able to have that excitement of opening a little yarn package every day, but not buying an Advent, because that can be really expensive, especially if you this time of year can already be really pricey. Or just in general, and I completely understand why they cost what they cost, and I like to support indie dyers whenever I can, but that's just a lot of money to spend on mini skeins. So, and it's also a fun way to connect with some knitting friends. I've done mini swaps just throughout the year anyway. So I did another mini swap this year with 2 friends. So basically I could package up 2 sets of 12 mini skeins and send them off. And then I received 2 sets of 12 mini skeins. And in the past, I knit a cowl with my swap yarn one year, but last year I knit a pair of socks, and I really loved how those turned out. And it's also a really manageable amount to knit every day, because I like to open the Advent package and then knit it on the same day. So if I picked a bigger project, I would probably fall behind, and then I'd feel bad about falling behind. So I decided to do socks again this year. So I am knitting the Advent 2019 sock pattern by Natalie, who is Remembrances Pottery on Instagram. And so she has a different Advent pattern out this year, but this is her pattern from last year. So basically what I'm doing, so the first day I opened the package but didn't knit anything. And then on day 2, I opened it, and so then I knit. So this yarn is day 1 and day 2. And then I use day 2 as the background color in the next section, and day 3 is my contrast. And then this section is day 3 is my background, day 4 is the contrast. I use the term contrast color loosely, because as you can see in some of these sections, the colors are a lot closer, they blend together a lot more. But I found when you're doing like a scrappy sock, that doesn't matter as much. If I was planning out these socks to knit with scraps that I already had in my basket that I could look at and pick them out, I wouldn't put some of these colors together. But these are literally, they're randomly sent and randomly chosen. So because there's 3 of us this year, and because we were each sending 12 mini skeins to 2 people, we didn't put numbers on them. So they don't have numbers. I hung them up in a random order, and I'm opening them in a random order. There are a few times where I started knitting a section and I just really, really wasn't sure about the colors. There was no difference between the colors. And then, so then I waited and opened the next day's color and then kind of swapped them around, because you're the boss of your own knitting. So this is the first sock, and I really love, but again, I like the colors. I'm finding that the ones with higher contrast are my favorite. So I really love how this section turned out. And then this one. And the socks were not quite long enough when I got done the first one. So then I just repeated this colorwork section down here. And then I actually used the same colors to start the second sock. So this is sock number 1. This is sock number 2. And it's just so funny how there are so many pinks and everything in this one. And this one has much more traditional Christmassy colors with the red and the green. It's just so fun to see the different colors every day. So I was saying that some days I have swapped out colors. So this is yesterday's colorwork section. But the yarns from yesterday, so this was the yarn I'd used as the background for this part. So then it was going to be my contrast to make these snowflake shapes in this color, or in this section. But then the yarn that was with it is this, which I love both of these yarns, but there's just, it looks like there should be more contrast, but because they're both variegated and kind of speckled, there really was not a lot of contrast. Like, you really couldn't tell these two colors apart when I was starting to knit this snowflake section. So I decided that I would wait and see what today's color was before I completed that section. So today's color was this green. And I just knew right away that I was going to swap it out and use this as my background here. So I still have one more colorwork section to knit to get caught up for today, and that will be using these two colors. So yeah, so I'm just kind of playing around with that, and I'm keeping all of my minis. I have this yarn bowl that I bought from Designs by Sparrow, who on Instagram, and I bought this at a local craft fair a couple years ago. And I don't use it a ton because I do usually just keep my projects in project bags. But I use it if there's like a project that I'm only ever knitting on at home. And it's great for things like this to hold all the minis. Because then some of the colorwork sections require 3 colors. So then I'm kind of pulling from here when I need a 3rd color. And then I may put all of the rest of these into my Cozy Memories blanket once I'm done my socks. Or I may make something else with them. We will see. Every year I toy around with making some sort of like with knitting some sort of tiny ornaments or like a garland to hang up. And I've knit a few small pieces. I just don't like knitting really small fiddly things. Like even I've knit a few stuffed animals for my little sisters at various times, and it's just not the kind of knitting that I enjoy doing. So I thought maybe I would make a garland. I thought maybe I'd make a garland with these, but they may just end up as pieces into my Cozy Memories blanket. Which is, whenever I finish like a row in my Cozy Memories blanket, I'm like, maybe now? Am I done now? Like, is this how big I want it? And then instead of trying to think of a different scrappy project to cast on, I just add another stripe. But actually, well, this is going to be a long enough podcast. I might as well pull it out and show you. So just hold on. So, because I feel like it's been a really long time since I talked about this blanket, especially since I typically record outside. It's just not very movable, not super portable. So I just have it in a basket that sits on my cubby shelf. So I have yarn scraps in here. This is a couple summers ago. I did like a magic knot ball with a ton of the really small bits left over from mini skeins that I'd already put into my blanket. Thinking maybe at some point I'll probably do like a crochet scrappy blanket at some point. We will see. So my scrap yarn lives in there. So at this point, my blanket is this wide. Ooh, can't really see very well. So it pretty much fills that frame. So I would guess that this must be a little over 3 feet wide. And then can't you tell how long that is when I just hold it up like that? So it's getting really big. So basically so I'm sitting down. I'm sitting in a chair. So it can reach the floor. All right, so it's covering all of my legs. And then it comes this far up. So it's pretty much as tall as I want it. I'm knitting one last row across the top. But how I've been knitting this, when I originally started this blanket, I started it, I think it was just 10 squares. I didn't have a lot of scrap yarn, so I didn't really know how big I wanted it. So I started it down on this end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I think it was only about this wide. But one of the beauties of how this blanket is knit is that you can just go in and add squares whenever. So the last several months when I work on it, I will add in a stripe across the top, and then I will add in a stripe going this direction. And I have definitely repeated yarns in this blanket. There's some that I've used more than once, but I love being able to look at it and look at different sections where I did a swap with someone and I can see the yarns that they gave me, or I can look at it and remember what projects I knit with the yarn. So yeah, it's definitely getting to be a really good size. And I think I'm close to being done. I think I may do one more vertical row with the rest of my Advent mini skeins. And then I think I will put this aside and do a crocheted scrappy blanket. I don't crochet a lot, but this summer I crocheted a blanket for my sister and her fiance, now husband, for a wedding present. So I think I may do a crochet scrappy blanket next. My one holdup is that I like that with the squares, I knit it and that square is done, and then I still have some yarn left over to then do like a mini skein swap or to send to somebody, versus in a crochet blanket, sometimes you just use all of that scrap yarn that you have. So that's kind of my one holdup, because I do like to do mini swaps either for Advent or other times of the year. But I'm thinking that maybe if I just get like a big jar or container, and then when I have I have this much yarn left over from a pair of socks. I often will have anywhere from 20 to 40 grams of yarn left over from a pair of socks. So maybe what I can do is wind off like 5 to 7 grams of this yarn and put it in that jar, so that if I want to do a swap, it's ready to swap. And then I just put the rest of it into my blanket. That's kind of what I'm thinking, because then I can use those more odd amounts of yarn, but then still have some yarn to use to swap. So I'm thinking, I think that's what I'll do once I put in my Advent mini skeins into my massive blanket. So I think, I'm looking around, I think that's all I have for knitting. I just have one book recommendation really quickly. If you are looking for like a cozy, atmospheric, slightly suspenseful read for wintertime. So this fall, I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. It is massive, and it is wonderful. So the blurb on the back says that this is an epic tale of 19th century England and the two very different magicians who, as teacher and pupil and then as rivals, emerged to change its history. So the premise of this book is early 19th century England, but what if there was magic? And it starts off with nobody really does magic, but people study it. They call themselves like theoretical magicians, like they study magic, they read magical books. like books written by magicians in the past. But then 2 magicians emerge and begin practicing magic. And so like the back says, they start out as teacher and pupil, and then they become rivals in their different views on English magic. And they go on, one of them in particular will go on adventures, and bad things happen to people around them, and then they try to figure that out. And it is just like completely, they use magic to fight against Napoleon, and it is just fascinating. Susanna Clarke's world building is incredible. If you really like an atmospheric read with a really rich setting with a lot of world building, I highly recommend Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. One of my favorite things about this book is the footnotes. So it's kind of pretending, like some sections of it, it's like almost like a history of magic in England. So there's some footnotes where, like, they mention earlier in this page, they reference like a place or like the name of a place, and the footnote is like, oh, that's so and so's home in this place. So they're providing some like historical context, or there will be a reference to a magical spell, and then you get a footnote that tells you what happened the last time somebody used that magical spell. So I don't know what this would be like on audiobook, because I read the print version. I'm sure they do something with it. But I got this out from the library, and I'd read about half of it, and then I had to return it. So I bought a paper copy. I bought a used paperback so that I could finish it kind of at my leisure. And I am so glad I read this book. She came out with a second book, not related to this book, because this book was published in 2004. And this year she came out with a new book, this is her first book, and this is her second book that came out this year. And I'm excited to read that one at some point. But yeah, if you really want to like settle in with a book with really great characters and an amazing setting and a really cool, fun premise, then I highly recommend Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I feel like I have talked, I can feel my throat, like I've not talked this much in a long time. And that's coming from someone who talks a lot, like in a regular daily basis. But not for an hour and a half or however long I've been talking. I took a break to go switch my laundry over, so I don't really know how long I've been talking. But yeah, so I hope that you enjoyed catching up with my knitting. I enjoyed being able to share what I've been making with you. And like I said, I will still be on Instagram a little bit, probably liking and commenting more than I post for the next few months, because tax season. But yeah, I hope that you are enjoying being able to close out on 2020 and that we can move forward into 2021. And until I see you next time, I hope that you have happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and that you are able to find a little bit of time to do some crafting, some making just for yourself, even if you're doing a ton of Christmas knitting or something. So until I see you next time, happy making. Bye.